Yo guys, how we all doing? It's FanFic Reader here, and we are here with the Oncoming Storm, Chapter 2, but it's really Chapter 3 because I kind of skipped the first half of the last chapter. So technically we're on Chapter 3. I want to thank you all for who left a like and a comment and subscribed on the last video of Oncoming Storm. And here we are to carry on again. Are you ready? Let's do this. The Oncoming Storm, Chapter 3, in the depths of Project Cadmus. Running back through the sublevels of Project Cadmus, the group made a particularly odd sight as the three customs sidekicks ran at the front of the pack, leading the way to the elevator shaft and to freedom, with the Superman clone, amazingly named Superboy, running closely after them, the unconscious form of Guardian slung unceremoniously over his shoulder. As he used his super strength to half drag, half carry the unconscious brainwashed hero after them. After which Percy brought up the rear, his Dracon bone sword in hand as he padded along after the rest of the group, allowing them to direct him, as they likely knew just about as much of the layout of this place as he did, with Percy instead busying himself by fending off the many xenomorphs that were swarming around them, the creatures having all been alerted to the presence by the alarms, and then sent to pursue them. No doubt by the escaped scientist, Dr. Desmond. Thus far, the group had managed to keep ahead of the swarm of xenomorphs, though, all of them moving rapidly through the fleshy corridors, even as more and more of their horned, grey-skinned creatures erupted from glowing red bubo-like tumours on the sides of the walls, forcing the group of five to defend themselves as from all angles as Robin pulled out an extended staff, smacking and thwacking away at any grey creature that came near. Aqualad used his water braziers to create hammers out of water, even as he smashed everything that got in his way. Kid Flash, meanwhile, rushed ahead, a red and yellow blur as he kicked and punched any of the creatures that got near him. "Here, hold this!" Superboy suddenly grunted as he thrust Guardian's heavy body over to Percy, making the demigod grunt at the sudden weight, even as he had to angle his sword away from it so he didn't accidentally impale the unconscious brainwashed hero. "Hey!" Percy shouted in irritation, even as he saw the clone turn and leap at the giant gorilla-like xenomorph that got in the way. The sudden impact of his charge causing them to pause long enough for Superboy to smack the two of them and send them crashing to the side of the corridor before he was hit by the third. "Superboy, we are trying to escape, not bring down the whole building on top of us," Aqualad shouted as he turned and saw what the clone was up to. "You want to escape?" the clone shouted as he threw the last behemoth into the other two as they just started to get back up, after which the clone began to run towards them. "Duh, dumbass, that was the whole point," Percy grunted before he threw Guardian back at Superboy, making him blink in confusion as he caught him, only for Percy to leg it towards the elevator. "Back at ya." "Oi!" Superboy shouted, only for Percy to ignore him, as he instead swung out with his sword, cutting down three of the humanoid xenomorphs before he ripped the blood from one of the bodies, forging it into a spear of ice as he did so, after which he hurled it at the behemoth-like creatures that were lumbering after them, the spear stabbing through one of the xenomorph's red eyes, causing it to lurch backwards, thrashing as it did so, even as it crashed into some of its fellows in a chaotic mess of thrashing, spasming limbs. "Now come on!" Percy barked over his shoulder at Superboy, not waiting for a response. He instead just turned and ran around the corner to where Kid Flash and Aqualad were forcing open the doors to the elevator shaft. "Don't tell me what to do!" Superboy shouted after him. Not that that stopped him from following as he dragged Guardian after him. "He's like a bloody broken record, that one," Percy grumbled, wiping the creature's dark red blood off of his sword, not missing as he did so the wide-eyed look of disgust on Robin's face, or the discomfort showed both on Aqualad and Kid Flash's expressions. No doubt they would whine at him at the unnecessary force later, but for now, they had other things to worry about. "Now come on, let's get out of here!" With that, Percy said, sheathed his sword and then jumped through the open elevator doors, after which he landed on the other side, his hands digging into the metal with a hissing sound, the metal warping under them, even as he began to pull himself up, leaving steamy handholds behind him as he did so. Seeing this, Robin grabbed Kid Flash and then used the grappling gun to follow as he shot up into the shaft, rapidly passing Percy by as he continued to climb, using both his enhanced strength and the particularly corrosive poison he was exuding from the pores of his hands to warp the metal to climb up enough, something which Aqualad took advantage of, even if he wasn't sure how his temporary teammate accomplished the feat, as the dark-skinned teen cloaked his hands in water, the tattoos on his arm glowing blue, before he then used the still smoking handholds Percy created, the two of them quickly ascending the elevator shaft. Seeing his fellows already moving up, Superboy grabbed Guardian before he too leaped through the elevator doors and flew upwards. Or rather, he tried to, because as Percy and the others ascended, they heard him let out a loud shout as gravity took hold and he began to fall. Not that he fell too far, because as he reached the peak of his jump, just a little below Percy and Aqualad, Robin then shot out another grappling hook, catching the duo before they could fall too far. Superman can fly. Why can't I fly? Superboy asked dejectingly into the slight silence that followed. Don't know, but it looks like you can leap over a giant building in a single bound. Still pretty cool, Kid Flash praised, trying to be comforting with Superboy ignoring him as he instead quietly thanked Robin for the save. Before any more could be said though, the group in the elevator shaft suddenly heard an enormous sound above. A rushing sound of metal on metal. The source of which rapidly became apparent as they looked up to see the elevator was heading right towards them. "We need to get out of here, now!" Aqualad shouted, even as Percy pushed off from the side of the shaft, scrabbling slightly as he found Purchase on the lodge opposite him, before he pulled himself up and then forced the doors open to the nearest open floor level. "That's a good shout, now come on!" Percy grunted as he did this, gesturing as he did so for the rest of the group to follow him. Not that he needed to, as by this point they were all in the mindset of doing just that, piling in on him and nearly knocking him onto his arse. As they all quickly jumped through the open door and just narrowly avoided getting squashed by the elevator. Of course, they weren't given long to recover from this, before once again a group of Xenomorphs spotted them and quickly gave chase, forcing the group to get up and rapidly head off. Percy and Superboy taking the lead in this, whilst the other three covered their backs. "Turn left! Left!" Superboy shouted suddenly as they ran, with them instinctively following his lead. "Now right," he said once again, only to lead them seemingly into a dead end. "Oh, great direction, Sup. Are you trying to get us repotted?" Kid Flash yelled out nervously as he saw their predicament, the sounds of their pursuers sounding out loudly enough behind them, which just made Superboy lower his head in confusion. "It's a dead end. We'll need to fight our way out." Percy spoke up next, already drawing his sword as he shifted his legs into a ready position, preparing to lunge forward and into the fray at any moment. "No, stop. We don't need to fight, this is exactly what we needed." "Everyone get in the ventilation shaft," Robin interrupted, his eyes flickering over to Percy as he lowered his sword, even as he then pulled the ventilation shaft cover overhead. "Spoil sport," Percy grumbled, sheathing his sword again, before he moved back up to help his fellows and into the ventilation shaft. "Wait! The Guardian is too big to fit!" Aqualad suddenly interrupted as he, Superboy, Kid Flash and Robin got into the overhead ventilation system, only for them to then realise that the bulky built Guardian was too wide to get through the narrow vent. "You lot go, I'll take Guardian and find another way," Percy decided, grabbing Guardian as he did so, before he slung him over his shoulder and drew his sword. "We can't just leave you behind," Aqualad said, shaking his head as he made to get down. "Well, you're going to have to," Percy said with a shake of his head. "Now go. I'll need as much time as I can get away." "Aqualad, come on, we can't let him do it alone," Kid Flash said, shaking his head as he did so, before he struggled to get past the dark-skinned Atlantean. "You're wasting time," Percy quickly replied, shifting Guardian's body around his shoulder as he did so, freeing his left hand so that he could raise it, and also so he could make the pipes above those attached to the sprinklers explode, covering the area in water as he did so. A slight amount of power and a wave of his free hand, he froze the walls and room around him solid, blocking the young heroes from getting out. This didn't stop them from seeing him though, as he instead raised two fingers and then gestured for them to fuck off before he ran off himself. "What just happened?" Robin demanded of the two behind him. "I do not know, but Percy has taken Guardian and run, and has frozen the air shaft shut," Aqualad replied, musing as he did so on just what abilities Percy seemed to have. After all, he could apparently control water, ice, and even acid. "Well, we can't just wait around," Robin grunted, looking at his wrist computer as he did so, even as he internally cursed losing track of the wild card of the group. Percy. "The guy seems tough enough. I'm sure he'll be able to meet us up there." "Robin is right. We should take advantage of the distraction Percy has made and get out of here. Once we do so, we can contact the League for help and then go in and save him. We can't let his sacrifice be in vain." Aqualad spoke up again, looking at the others as he did so, before he gestured for them to start moving. A little while later, with Percy. "Damn it! This was a mistake," Percy grumbled to himself as he dragged Guardian through the much more normal and clinical-looking corridors of the upper levels, the water pipes overhead exploding as he did so, continually showering both himself and everything else in water as he ran for the staircase. Keeping his sword sheathed and his grip on the large helmeted man tight, Percy had to rely on his hydrokinetic abilities as he sent blasts of water out at any xenomorph that got close to him, his whips and blades of water cutting through their flesh as he used just a single hand to mould, solidify and manipulate the falling water. A few years ago, when he first started out as a demigod on his first couple of quests, such a level of control would be beyond him. Back then, he just relied on throwing the occasional wave when he could, and then legging it, or using his trusty sword, Riptide. Now though, after training his abilities and honing them in many battles, against a whole assortment of titans, monsters, demigods, gods, and giants, not to mention his journey through Tartarus, such a level of control was almost simple at this point. More than that though, he had also begun to expand his skill set, pushing himself beyond the limits as he sought to not only master his abilities relating to his father's domain over the sea, but also his domains of earthquakes and storms. With his confrontation with Achilles in the depths of Tartarus having opened his eyes to his own potential, as he pushed past the limits he had created for himself, it had gotten to the point at which he could not only release seismic waves through either the ground or the air, but could also absorb and focus that power, which in turn allowed him to manipulate the vibrational waves from his hands and feet. On top of that, with his water, he could not only draw it from the air or living things around him like the trees and plants, negating the need for such large water sources, but he could also freeze it at will, or make it boiling hot. He could even turn it into steam and manipulate that, or change the water's pH balance, which he had found out when he exploited his toxicnesis ability. The one he had discovered courtesy of the old misery guts herself, Achilles. But he had in fact gone beyond that. He had discovered he could also manipulate the water in a person's body. He could contract the blood vessels in someone's brain, causing an unnatural headache. He could starve the brain of blood, causing temporary unconscious. He could even restrict someone's muscles, paralysing them as long as he maintained control. Then again, he was still learning new things in regards to this ability, as he found the Superman's clone's blood all but impossible to control. Though whether this was due to his physiology, his raw strength, or other factors, Percy wasn't sure. After all, thus far he had only used it on normal, mundane mortals. He hadn't tried on anything supernatural or alien. In fact, the only domain Percy hadn't had time to experiment with was storms. Through that domain, he had found himself capable of very limited aerokinesis and electrokinesis, abilities similar to the ones his frenemy, Jason, had possessed. Even if they were much, much weaker than the son of Jupiter's, still he had them. He just needed the time to test them out, and to experiment with what exactly he could do with them. Shaking off these thoughts, Percy continued through the flooded corridors, noticing as he did so the place was unnoticeably empty of both xenomorphs and people, the sight of which made Percy ponder whether he was being pursued by anyone, or whether they were chasing after the Superboy clone and the others. Not that he could complain, not when he made it to the staircase and began ascending, thus far avoiding pursuit. Though from what he could hear further up the staircase, and the shouts and shrieks that echoed downwards towards him, his companions were not as lucky. "Come on then, Guardian," Percy grumbled, pulling the large man after him, and wishing as he did so that he had super strength, as his arms were beginning to ache. After all, he might be stronger than most mortals, strong enough to carry a full-grown man, but he was no Hercules, as unfortunately not all demigods were born equal. I mean, just look at his friend Frank's abilities. Still, the abilities he did have were nothing to turn his nose up at. I really shouldn't have hit you so hard, should I? I mean, if I knew I would be carrying you, I would have just given you a tap. But then again, you were kind of a bad guy, so... Despite that though, he couldn't help but grumble about it as he carried Guardian up the stairs. He had once held up the very sky itself, for fuck's sake. I mean, sure, it had been for under a minute, but it was still quite the feat, and at the time it made him ponder whether he did indeed have strength comparable to a god, or Atlas, the titan of strength and endurance. Unfortunately, though, that feat was more about raw strength, after both Luke and Annabeth had held it for far longer than him. And neither of them had been strong as him, or even that much stronger than just a regular mortal, or a pretty strong regular mortal. Letting out another sigh as his thoughts began to wander, Percy continued heading up the stairs, his sword once again in his hand as he found himself finally meeting resistance, which, annoyingly, wasn't at the time when he was in a corridor flooded by sprinkling water. Raising his sword, Percy made swift economical slashes as he took the steps one at a time, keeping his balance despite the body of the Guardian as he cut the grey creatures down at the legs and knees, and then finished them up and by ramming the spiked crossguard of his sword into their bodies or crushing their chests underfoot. "You are really not making this easy," Percy growled up to the still unconscious Guardian, A few minutes later, as he climbed over the last of the dead and dying xenomorphs, making it to the top floor now, leaving behind a trail of nearly 15 grey-skinned bodies as he did so. And done, Percy cheered. A few moments later, as he burst through the door at the top of the staircase and hurled the Guardian off his shoulder and onto the ground, ignoring the loud thudding sound he made as he did so, Percy's sea-green eyes instead moving off in the direction of some nearby fighting. No doubt it was his companions at work. Nearly there, Percy sighed again, before he grabbed Guardian by the ankle and dragged him after him as he headed towards the fighting. A few minutes later, when Percy finally did make it to the source of the fighting, and into a much larger room, he found himself pausing again as he took in the sight in front of him. First off, Robin, Aqualad, Superboy and Kid Flash were all present, each one of them darting around the room as they fought their enemy. The enemy in question seemed to be a 9.5 foot tall monstrosity with glowing red eyes, molted greyish blue skin and large bulbous muscles. The most grotesque part though was its face, upon which Percy could still spot the remnants of what looked like the skin on the creature's body, including a stretched and ripped face that covered the creature's own. Well shit, it's real life Leatherface, Percy mused, pausing for a moment to take it in before he once again dropped Guardian. They were on the home stretch now and Guardian was as safe as he was ever going to be. Percy! Aqualad shouted as he noticed Percy's arrival, even as the four of them dodged and weaved around the attacking Blockbuster, formerly known as Chief Scientist of Cadmus, Dr. Desmond, before he drank one of his own solutions to get the power he would need to bring order to Cadmus. Waterboy, Speedy, Cape Lad, Percy greeted, nodding his head with a grin as he deliberately got their names wrong. For no other reason than because he was bored and feeling a little irritable. It's Kid Flash! Kid Flash retorted as he blurred around the room, bouncing off the pillars as he avoided the creature's charge and arm swipe. I think he already knows that. He's just trying to break the tension, Aqualad replied as he backed away from Blockbuster, even as he gave up on chasing Kid Flash and instead got into a tussle with Superboy, both of them punching and kicking each other, with Blockbuster taking advantage as he landed a blow on Superboy's chin, one which sent him smashing into a nearby pillar. Awesome! Well, we could use your help now, Kid Flash replied sarcastically. Percy, Aqualad, Kid, keep Ugly busy. I need a few minutes to come up with a plan. Robin, the youngest of the group, shouted from where he was crouched behind the pillar further down the room. Oh, sounds like fun, Percy shrugged before he ran at Blockbuster, his sea-green eyes locking onto the much larger being's limbs as he closed in. Be careful! He's strong enough to throw Superboy around. He's not someone you can beat with brute force, Aqualad called out after Percy as he saw the older, darker-haired boy charge in. Noted, Percy replied as he lunged for the creature, his eyes narrowing as he stepped in, his sword raised at the ready, even as his other hand came up gripping onto Blockbuster's wrists, after which Percy twisted his wrist and pulled, tugging the much larger, stronger foe off balance, mid-lunge, and for a moment as he tried to find his footing. Even as Percy darted forwards, lunging forwards with his sword as he thrust upwards and into Blockbuster's torso, the blade piercing the creature's bluish-grey flesh lower down than Percy had aimed, but still causing some internal damage, even if the blade missed the heart and lungs. Letting out a roar as the sword impaled him, Blockbuster suddenly twisted, his other leg coming up, before he landed a knee into Percy's side, the blow lacking his full power as he was off balance, but being enough to knock Percy away to one side, despite the demigod having tried to block with his right arm. Rolling with the blow, Percy growled as he thrust his hands up and sent a massive seismic wave through the air. The sudden wave of vibrational energy hitting Blockbuster head-on and knocking him off his feet as he was sent smashing into a nearby pillar, shattering it in two as it did so. Whew! Ouch, that hurt, Percy grumbled as he forced himself up, pulling the water from the air as he did so, before he then shrouded his hand in it, even as he put it over his aching ribs, the water quickly going to work to heal the aches and pains. Dude, you just stabbed him, and you're the one complaining about being hurt? Kid Flash shouted as he stopped and stared at Percy, even as Superboy let out a roar as he tackled the now wounded and bleeding Blockbuster. Well, it's a sword, that's what it's made for, Percy replied glibly, as he dismissed Kid Flash and instead turned to face Blockbuster. Besides, I missed. I was aiming for the heart. If I had struck true, the bastard wouldn't have managed to do that to me. It was a stupid mistake on my part. It's been a while since I last fought an opponent that big. I misjudged, okay? Wait, you were going in for the kill? Dude, we're heroes. We don't just kill the bad guys. Kid Flash said in shock, his attention fully on Percy now. Wait, what? You don't kill monsters? Percy asked, a bemused look on his face. I suppose most of the heroes here are different from the ones I know. Well, clearly, but for now we should aim at incapacitating Desmond, and doing so in a way that does not take his life, Aqualad cut in, not wanting to get caught up in an argument about ethics with their new companion. Not when they were in the midst of a fight, at least. Well, if you want, Percy shrugged, not really seeing what the problem was. Then again, most of the enemies he fought regenerated in Tartarus. And the ones that didn't, well, at the time it was war, and sometimes casualties just can't be helped. Yeah, okay, now everyone's listening, I have a plan, Robin cut in, his gaze flickering over to Percy for a moment before it went back to Blockbuster when he saw the angry Superboy getting punched into a nearby wall. We need to aim for the pillars and bring the roof down on him. I have a plan for how we can do it. You do that, Percy nodded before he ran at Blockbuster, his gaze on the sword that was still jammed in the side, the sword now probably stemming with the blood flowing from the wound. I'll keep it busy. Wait! Robin shouted, irritation lacing his voice. No, leave him. He makes a good point. He'll keep Desmond busy while we enact your plan, Robin. Aqualad interrupted, getting a nod from both Robin and Kid Flash as he did so, even if Robin looked a bit irritated that Percy wasn't listening. Likewise, Superboy also got up and followed Percy's lead, throwing himself forward with a yell as he once again rushed the large, bluish-skinned former human. Ignoring the yell, Percy released vibrational waves from the soles of his feet, blasting himself forward faster than he usually would be capable of, even as he drew on the surrounding water in the air, forming a layer of water around his finger before he froze it, creating a claw-like gauntlet. Following on from that, Percy then crashed into Blockbuster, one of his fists smashing into the larger being's face, discombobulating him and knocking him backwards. Even as Percy wrapped the other hand around his throat, his ice claw piercing the flesh, before, with another thought, the ice melted and became liquid. Even as it suddenly became poisonous, the flesh around the claw wounds rapidly beginning to bubble. Screaming in agony, Blockbuster grabbed Percy by an arm and threw him away with pure brute force, his other hand grasping his throat. Even as his genetically altered body attempted to fight off the poison flowing through his system. It was a fight he was losing though, because even as he scrabbled at his neck, his veins were visibly beginning to darken, and his scream of pain were turning into low raspy gurgles as he struggled to breathe. Superboy roared as oblivious to this as he smashed into the slowly dying Blockbuster, sending him hurting backwards into another pillar, breaking it as he did so, causing a portion of the roof above to collapse, trapping Blockbuster's legs under the rubble. Superboy! Keep destroying the pillars! Robin shouted from the few meters back as he and his two companions broke off, only to pause when they saw Blockbuster's weakly twitching body and the bubbling, melting skin around his throat. I do not believe that will be necessary, Robin. Aqualad spoke up calmly as he lowered his arms and approached Desmond's gargling, broken form. What did you do? Robin shouted as he looked between the startled Superboy and the dismissive Percy, who even now approached Blockbuster and pulled his sword out of its gut, with a wet, suckling sound, releasing a sudden flow of blood as he did so. I slew a monster. Percy shrugged before he raised his hand and pulled Blockbuster's blood off of his sword with his hydrokinetic ability, frowning slightly as he found the dark crimson liquid harder to control than the normal humans. Once again, it seemed he needed to experiment with this ability more. Though if you want to know exactly what I did, I basically lowered the pH balance of the water to 1 and basically infused it with the creature's neck and bloodstream. It looks nasty, but really it was a pretty quick way to go. That wasn't a creature, this was a human! A man, you just killed a man in cold blood! Robin shouted, his voice toned with rage as he looked between the still confused Superboy, the stoic Aqualad, and the frowning and uncomfortable Kid Flash. Exactly! He was a human, but then he mutated his body into this thing and tried to kill us all. I'll admit, I could have shown a little more restraint, but he was out of control and trying to kill us, Percy replied, looking around at Robin now, his face twisting into a slight frown as he saw the look in the boy's face. Look, I don't know how they do things where you're from, but we don't kill our captives, Robin snapped harshly. That thing wasn't our captive. As I said, he was out of control, rabid and bloodthirsty. He was a monster, and I slew it, Percy retorted, beginning to get angry himself. Enough! Aqualad interrupted, stepping in between the two. This was a stressful situation, and our friend here put his life on the line to help us.
We might disagree on his actions, but they were in both the defense of himself and of us. Yeah. Besides, I think we can leave it up to them to decide, Kid Flash interrupted as he looked up through the hole in the ceiling and at the members of the Justice League that he could see descending from the sky, and through the partially ruined roof before they fell into place, surrounding him and the others. Well, shit. Percy spoke up dryly, even as he sheathed his sword and pulled his coat up tighter around him, buckling it closed and hiding the hilt of his sword and his bronze breastplate from the sight as he eyed the group of newly arrived heroes cautiously. Most of them he knew of, if only by reputation. Out of all of them, though, he had only ever met one, and at present that hero's gaze was boring into him, her waist-length dark hair flowing behind her, and her crystal blue eyes locked on Percy to the exclusion of all else, her flawless features twisting into a look of both anger and perhaps concern, with the hero in question being known to the world as Wonder Woman, but Percy knew her as Diana, the Princess of Themyscira, and his frenemy of sorts. Tightening his jaw, Percy boldly met Diana's gaze, refusing to back down as the sea green bored into sky blue. It was as this stare down was occurring that Superman, a heavily built man with a red cape, a blue bodysuit, and a gold shield on his chest, with a rather red S, locked onto the clone's face, taking a sharp intake of breath as he did so, his expression darkening, even as he prompted the other watching hero beside him, Batman, to speak up. Is that what I think it is? Batman questioned, his gaze locked on Superboy, even as Superman now avoided eye contact, much to the clone's shock. He doesn't like being called an idiot. Kid Flash spoke up helpfully, before he quieted down as he saw his own mentor, the Flash, look at him sharply. With Aquaman, an orange-clad hero with a gold blonde hair and beard, looking disappointingly down at his own protege. "I'm Superman's clone," Superboy announced in a yell, throwing caution to the wind as he gazed around at the reaction of all the surrounding heroes, most of whom had stunned expressions on their faces that varied throughout the League members, with even Wonder Woman looming away from Percy and instead looking between Superman and the clone in surprise. "Start talking," Batman ordered suddenly, and the sidekicks, Kid Flash, Robin and Aqualad, were all too quick to obey, with Superboy just standing there awkwardly as the surrounding heroes looked between him and the sidekicks, their gazes burning with suspicion, caution, and curiosity. As this was happening, Percy found himself slowly edging away. Sure, he wanted to be a hero, which was why he had been here in the first place, doing some freelance investigation. But at the same time, he wasn't sure he wanted the Justice League's scrutiny on him, nor was he entirely sure what their reaction would be to him. After all, would they be like Robin and condemn him for killing? It was all very strange to him. Percy was used to slaying monsters, he was good at it, and had done it many times. In fact, by this point it was almost instinctive. On top of that, he wasn't a stranger to killing demigods either, as he had blown up dozens when he and his comrade, Charles Beckendorf, had planted bombs on the luxury ferry and had killed even more during the Battle of Manhattan. Maybe it was his godly half, but fighting and killing in the name of Olympus had always felt natural to him, as it had to the other demigods he knew. It was in their blood. They were born for battle, born to fight the enemies of Olympus and bring honour and glory to their parents' names. Percy was no exception either. Despite considering himself independent, he had always done everything that was asked of him. And even when he was fucked over by the gods, and mainly that cunt Hera, he had continued to do his duty for his family, for his bloodline, and for honour. "And where do you think you're going?" The voice of Batman suddenly interrupted the sidekick stories, the Batman's gaze locked on Percy as he continued to walk away. Well, you seem to have everything covered, so I thought I would just leave you to it. I mean, you know what they say about too many cooks spoiling the broth. Percy trailed, somewhat lamely. He might be very good in a fight, but not so good in an argument, or talking his way out of trouble. "Who are you?" Aquaman replied, a frown on his face now as he locked gazes with Percy, his gaze harsh, but not angry or aggressive. "Who am I?" "Well, who are you first? Surely you know it's polite to give your own name before demanding another's." Percy shot back at him, noticing as he did how Aquaman's eyes narrowed. Yeah, he had heard of this Aquaman, the proclaimed King of Atlantis. Well, Percy had some of his own thoughts about that. Smooth, man, Kid Flash muttered sarcastically from beside him. I am Aquaman, Aquaman replied abruptly. Now as to my question, who are you? Give me a moment to make up a name and then I'll tell you. Or are you telling me that your name is literally Aquaman? And if it is, first name Aqua, second name Man? Percy retorted, probably in a petty tone. But he felt like being a little bit of an arse at the moment. He didn't like the man's tone. So I have to ask, does anyone ever call you Seaman? Show some respect, Aqualad began to say as both he and his king bristled at Percy's words, only to be interrupted by another strong, stern voice. His name is Perseus, Wonder Woman interrupted, her tone sharp as he looked from Batman to Percy. You know him? Batman asked sharply. Yes, he is a hero, Wonder Woman replied, her tone unwavering. No, he's a killer. He killed Desmond after the guy took the Blockbuster formula. Percy just killed him, Robin said loudly, unexpectedly speaking as he jumped forward to tell his story, his words causing the recriminating gazes of the Justice League to fall on Percy. Well, thanks for that, assistant, you little snitch, Percy said dryly to Robin, before he looked around at the others. It's a bit more complicated than that. Desmond turned himself into a mindless monster and tried to kill us. I put him down. Things happen in the heat of the fight. The dark-skinned Green Lantern spoke up. With the two bird-themed heroes, Hawkman and Hawkwoman nodded along in agreement. When in a fight, things move swiftly. Sometimes there is no other choice. What? You can't possibly justify this guy killing someone, Captain Marvel interrupted, his voice full of outrage. There is a fine line, but I agree with Green Lantern. Sometimes it is necessary, but where possible it should always be avoided. Those with power must show responsibility. Martian Manhunter pitched in, his tone low and slow, but his words containing a certain weight. But if we do give in to that impulse, then it will make us no better than the criminals we fight, Green Arrow argued. There is a big difference between killing an innocent or a captive, and between killing a man-turned monster in Mortal Kombat, Wonder Woman cut in harshly, her gaze moving over the rest of the League, as all the members present had a different perspective on the ethical issue of how much force is too much. And is killing ever the right choice, or acceptable? The Justice League operates by a code, one that condemns killing, Batman cut in, even as the various members began to argue, oblivious of the watching sidekicks, or of their current surroundings. But in the heat of battle, things can happen. Besides this, Perseus is not a member of the League, and so is not accountable to our code. However, he is a powered individual, one who seems to want to be a hero. It's just Percy, Percy said after that, even as Wonder Woman cut in with her own comment. Perseus has my full support. I do, Percy replied in surprise. He does? Aquaman asked in confusion, as many of the other heroes and sidekicks looked confused by her words. We'll speak of this later, back at the Watchtower, Batman said, looking over to Wonder Woman, now who gave a curt nod in response. Everyone is entitled to their secrets. But if it will potentially threaten the Justice League, or the innocent, then I will want to know about it. I will tell the Inner Circle what I believe necessary, Wonder Woman replied, before she looked around at the others. But other than that, like Batman said, Perseus, like everyone else, you are entitled to secrets. Percy frowned as he heard this, but didn't object. After all, Wonder Woman only knew so much about him. That's only because the Amazons guarded the gate of Tartarus on this world, a gate that Percy was very familiar with. Very well, now continue, Batman said finally, before he looked back to Robin, who in turn pushed back his own burning curiosity and continued the story, during which Percy continued to get many glances from the assembled Leaguers, especially when Robin helpfully described some of his abilities, or the ones he had seen, and Aqualad pitched in on some of his hydrokinetic abilities, all of which got intensely curious looks from Aquaman, as well as a narrowed-eyed judging look from Batman. And then Superboy landed the final hit on the dying Blockbuster, which knocked him through the pillar, and well, Robin trailed off as he looked over the lifeless body of Blockbuster that was still buried under the rubble. It was a pretty brief retelling, but Percy had to admit Robin had locked onto the most key points. On top of which, he was very curious about the confrontation with the horned xenomorph and the realization that this being had been controlling the other xenomorphs and had been helping Superboy. It almost made him feel guilty for killing so many of them. Then again, the fact they had been trying to kill him assured some of that guilt. Well, we'll figure something out for you. The League will, I mean. For now, I'd better make sure that the rest of Cadmus is properly secured and investigate the Guardian is safe. Superman awkwardly said to Superboy as the rest of the Leaguers broke up, after which he turned and flew away, leaving a very frustrated and disappointed Superboy behind as he did so. Not that Percy really paid much attention, as his gaze was instead on Wonder Woman as she strode up to him. "So this is what you've been up to," Wonder Woman said bluntly as she came to a stop in front of Percy. "Well, yeah, did you really think I was going to stay on that island forever?" Percy replied abruptly. "You could have told us you were leaving, as opposed to just disappearing one day," Wonder Woman replied, her tone still tinged with anger. "You're telling me that you wouldn't have tried to stop me?" Percy retorted, only for Wonder Woman to pause as she found herself unable to answer. "I thought so." Wonder Woman frowned at that, even as she looked over to where Batman, Aquaman, the Flash and Black Canary were all confronting the other three sidekicks and Superboy. The conversation looking tense as Batman apparently told them something they didn't like, which in turn made them group together as they looked challengingly at their mentors. "So what happens now?" Percy asked, into the silence that followed, bringing Diana's attention back to him. I am not sure," Diana replied, shifting about as she met Percy's eyes before she then looked over his shoulder to where the sidekicks now seemed to be celebrating something. Okay guys, that's going to be the end of chapter 3. I want to thank you all so much for listening in. And I want to thank so much for the support this last chapter got. It's the reason I continued. So yeah, if you like this chapter, please let me know in the comments down below. I promise you I read every single comment I see, even if I am a little bit late on the response. I know I am a bit late on the responses, I do apologise for that. But yeah, please like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next chapter of Avengers of Steel.